My dad and I built our company from the ground up, long hours, greasy hands, and a shared dream. But after his stroke, everything changed. My brother Greg, who once gambled away his future, swooped in like a vulture. And within weeks, I was kicked out of my own company with nothing but a letter. No warning, no explanation, just betrayal, signed in ink and blood. I thought family was forever, but I was wrong. Because the day he took everything from me was the day I decided to take everything back. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted the most, you'll feel every word of this story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means everything as we dive into this emotional journey. My name is Emily Ross, and for most of my life, I thought I understood what family meant. Loyalty, sacrifice, building something that would last for generations. I was 35, single, and proud to say that I co-owned one of the most respected appliance repair businesses in our state, Ross Repairs, founded by my father, Walter Ross, and me. Dad wasn't just a father. He was my mentor, my partner, my best friend. We spent years in his garage perfecting our craft. While other girls were playing with dolls, I was holding a wrench and learning how to rewire motors. By the time I turned 25, we had gone from weekend fixes to running a full-service company with dozens of employees. Our name stood for honesty, hard work, and doing right by the customer, something my father always said was worth more than any contract. I never really craved attention or luxury. My satisfaction came from seeing our employees grow, watching a broken dishwasher come back to life, or a grateful customer smile when we saved them thousands. That was the life I loved. And then there was Greg, my older brother, the golden child. The boy who never lifted a finger in the garage, but always had a new toy, a new car, or a new girlfriend. He was charming. I'll give him that, but completely irresponsible. Greg had a gambling problem in his 20s, wrecked 2 cars in his 30s, and practically vanished from our lives for almost 6 years. He was the kind of guy who only showed up when there was something to gain. Still, he was my brother. And when he came back around claiming he wanted to help with the business, I convinced my dad to give him a chance. He's changed, I said. Let's show him what family really means. Dad, being the generous soul he was, agreed. Greg was brought in as a business consultant, which mostly meant sitting in on meetings, shaking hands, and taking credit for things he didn't do. But I wanted to believe this was our fresh start. The 3 of us together, again fixing not just appliances, but maybe our broken family too. In those early months, I handled operation supply chains, employee issues, the heart of the company. Dad focused on mentoring junior technicians and passing down his knowledge. And Greg, he handled networking. Lunches, calls with potential investors, flashy presentations that sounded good but were built on air. Then everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning when I found Dad collapsed in the kitchen. A stroke. The doctors said it was serious but not fatal. He'd live, but he wouldn't be able to work or speak clearly again. Just like that, the man who built our company with his bare hands was confined to a bed, trapped in silence. It broke me. I spent every day at the hospital, talking to him, feeding him, reading emails out loud, in case he could somehow process what was happening. I promised him I'd keep the company, running the way we always had. I promised I'd protect everything we built. But while I was focused on caring for my father, Greg was focused on something else, something darker. He started requesting documents just to keep things organized, he said. He asked our accountant for updates, hired his own lawyer, claiming it was for legal safety. I trusted him. I had no reason not to. After all, who betrays their own sister while their father lies in a hospital bed? I had no idea what he was really doing behind closed doors. No idea that the papers he filed would tear everything apart. Looking back, there were signs. He started avoiding me, holding private meetings I wasn't invited to. Our longtime employees looked at me with concern, sometimes pity, but I was too deep in grief to question any of it. Then one day, I got a certified letter. Not from a client, not from a vendor, but from our own company. It was cold, official, and devastating. According to new filings, Greg had restructured the company ownership and had my name removed from all legal and financial documents. Ross. Repairs the company I co-built was now 100% under Greg's control. And I was out. No meeting. No explanation. No room for argument. Just gone. I sat on my front porch, holding that letter. My hands, shaking my heart hollow. My father was still alive, barely able to blink in acknowledgement. And somehow, everything he and I created was taken away from me by the very man we tried to forgive. At that moment, something inside me broke, but it wouldn't stay broken for long. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe some legal mix-up. Maybe someone else filed the wrong paperwork. I called Greg, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. I called again, then texted. "Can we talk? I got something weird in the mail." No reply. Finally, 2 days later, he showed up at the hospital, whistling as if nothing was wrong. He brought Dad some flowers and a bottle of juice like some polished politician. I waited until the nurse stepped out, then cornered him in the hallway. "What the hell did you do, Greg?" I demanded, holding the letter up like a loaded weapon. He didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. "Oh, that," he said with a smug little smirk. "It was necessary, Emily. Dad can't run things anymore. And you, well, you're too emotional. We need structure, a new direction. Investors are looking for confidence." I stared at him in disbelief. "You stole the company. You went behind my back. Behind Dad's back, while he's lying in a hospital bed." Greg shrugged. "It's just business. Don't take it personal." Those 4 words, "Don't take it personal," burned into my brain. It was personal. That company was my life, my sweat, my loyalty, my name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there paralyzed by betrayal so sharp it left me numb. That night, I sat in the hospital parking lot for hours, too angry to drive, too devastated to think straight. How could my own brother, my blood, do this? It wasn't just the company. It was the silence from my family. I reached out to my uncle, to my cousins. They all said the same thing. "Greg's the man now. He's trying to keep things afloat. You're just upset because you're not in charge anymore." Not in charge. They had no idea. I had run operations single-handedly for over a year. Greg barely knew what we even charged for a service call. But in their eyes, he was the man, the son, the heir. I was just the emotional daughter who got overwhelmed. What cut deepest was my mother. I called her in tears, hoping for some kind of validation, a shred of support. Her response, "Greg's doing what your father would have wanted. A man should lead. It's time you let go." That was the night something shifted inside me. The betrayal didn't just come from Greg. It came from the people I had spent my whole life protecting, helping, sacrificing for. Suddenly, I was an outsider in my own bloodline, but things only got worse from there. A few weeks later, the industry news broke. Ross Repairs had been sold to a foreign corporation, a faceless tech conglomerate that planned to gut the workforce and convert our legacy business into some cheap AI-run model. Greg had flipped the company, sold it for millions without a whisper, to the community, the employees, or to me. The same technicians I had trained for years were laid off. The same customers who trusted our name were now being serviced by bots and subcontractors. And Greg bought a yacht. I saw the pictures on Facebook. He was smiling on a deck somewhere in the Caribbean, drink in hand, surrounded by women and entrepreneur hashtags. Meanwhile, I was jobless, blacklisted. Rumors spread that I had left the company voluntarily, that I had been unstable, that I had a breakdown after Dad's stroke, and Greg had heroically stepped in to save things. Lie after lie. And no one, not one person, defended me. I tried applying for jobs at other tech firms, appliance networks, even freelance consulting gigs. But somehow, every door was shut. No callbacks, no interviews. I knew Greg had poisoned the well-spread whatever narrative he wanted while I was too broken to respond. At my lowest, I was living off savings, taking part-time repair jobs under the table just to keep the lights on. From co-founder to shadow, from leader to ghost. There was one moment, and I'll never forget it, when I walked past the old shop. The signage had changed. Ross Repairs was now Quick Fix Plus, powered by nanotech. My father's legacy, erased with a vinyl sticker. I remember standing there, staring up at that cold, lifeless logo, my hands trembling. An elderly woman walked out and saw me. "Weren't you the daughter Walter's girl?" I nodded. She leaned in and whispered, "It's not the same anymore. They treat people like numbers now. Your dad would have hated this." And that right there was the flicker I needed, that tiny moment of truth. Because I realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoration, about rebuilding what was stolen and making sure no one like Greg ever got to rewrite the story again. I wish I could say that after that moment, outside the shop, I found my fire and everything turned around. But life doesn't work like that, not when you've been gutted from the inside out. In the weeks that followed, I went quiet. Really quiet. I deleted my social media, stopped answering calls, and barely left the house. My days became a cycle of microwaved leftovers, job rejections, and numb scrolling through news articles about how Quick Fix Plus was revolutionizing the appliance service world. One headline said, "Former family business enters new era under bold male leadership." Bold, male. Leadership. I felt invisible, like everything I'd done for a decade had been scrubbed from the record, replaced with Greg's PR-fueled fantasy. I was humiliated, not just professionally, but personally. No one wanted the version of events where a woman built something great only to be betrayed by her brother and erased by her family. That story wasn't marketable. I tried to stay strong for my father. Every few days, I'd visit him in the rehab center, read him tech articles, show him pictures of our old repair van, try to make him smile. But he rarely reacted. His left side was paralyzed. His speech was mostly gone. I had no way of knowing if he understood any of it, if he even knew what Greg had done. The hardest part was watching his eyes. They used to be full of fire. Now, they were dull, heavy, tired. I wanted to believe he still recognized me, but even that hope started to fade. Then came the day that broke me entirely. I had just gotten back from the grocery store, a couple of cans of soup, some crackers, the cheapest coffee I could find, when a letter was taped to my front door. It was from Greg's lawyer. Apparently, he was suing me for defamation and interference with business relations. He claimed that my emotional outbursts and slanderous comments had cost him a potential investor. It was complete garbage. I hadn't said a word publicly since the takeover, but that didn't matter. The message was clear. Stay silent, or I'll bury you. I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, that letter in one hand, my rent notice in the other, and just broke. I cried in a way I hadn't since I was a child. The kind of crying that makes your chest heave, that pulls sound from places you didn't know existed. I cried for my father, for the company, for every technician who lost their job, for every time I stayed late at work while Greg partied on a beach. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who believed that family meant something. And then I stopped crying. Because that's when the anger arrived. It didn't roar. It didn't scream. It whispered. This is not how it ends. I started paying closer attention to the details Greg overlooked. The more I researched, the more cracks I saw in the glossy facade he built. For example, the buyer he sold the company to, Nanotech Industries, had a reputation for predatory acquisitions. They were already under scrutiny in 2 states for violating labor laws. Greg, in his arrogance, had rushed the sale without proper legal protections. There were loopholes, violations, paper trails. I began to dig. I found the public filings from the sale. The timeline didn't add up. Greg had declared full ownership of the company before my father had legally signed over power of attorney. That was a massive red flag. It meant the sale itself might have been invalid. And I wasn't the only one who noticed. I reached out to a former employee, Carlos, one of our lead technicians. He had always been loyal to my father and had been laid off during the transition. When I asked him if he had ever signed any documents about the company's restructuring, he laughed bitterly. Greg made us all sign NDAs before the sale, he said, but I got copies, just in case, just in case. That phrase repeated in my mind like a drumbeat. Maybe I had been naive. Maybe I had trusted too blindly. But now I had one thing Greg didn't: the truth. And I was done hiding. I began making lists, not of revenge, not yet, but of facts, evidence, contacts. I called a friend from college who worked in corporate compliance. I asked questions, took notes, pieced together the ugly mosaic of Greg's scam. And with each puzzle piece, something inside me started to rebuild. Not hope, not yet, but steel. I realized I had 2 choices: stay broken and disappear, or fight like hell and reclaim what was stolen, not just from me, but from my father's name. Greg wanted war. Good. He had no idea who he just picked a fight with. The deeper I dug, the more rot I found. Greg hadn't just betrayed me, he'd betrayed the company, the staff, and every principle my father built the business on. The sale to Nanotech was shady from top to bottom. The transition reports were missing signatures. Employee NDAs were coercive. Several client contracts had been altered before the sale, inflating our projected revenue to boost the selling price. Fraud. It wasn't just immoral. It was potentially illegal. And Greg, he had no idea I was building a case against him slowly, carefully, piece by piece. But that didn't mean it was easy. Each day, I woke up to an apartment that felt colder, smaller. The power company was threatening shutoff if I didn't pay by the end of the week. I was down to ramen and tap water. One of my tires had gone flat, and I couldn't afford a replacement. I walked everywhere, rain or shine. There were nights I nearly gave up when the weight of it all pressed so hard on my chest I couldn't breathe. Nights I stared at my father's old wrench set, wondering what he'd say if he could speak. Was he disappointed in me? Would he have chosen Greg? But then, something shifted. One morning, I received a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Emily. My name is Jenna. I used to work in HR at Ross Repairs before the merger. I heard what happened. I just wanted you to know you weren't crazy. We all saw how hard you worked. I'm sorry we didn't say anything sooner." I played it 5 times. It was just one voice, one message, but it was enough. I reached back out to Carlos, and he connected me with others who had been laid off. Quietly, they shared documents, screenshots, dates. Most didn't want their names involved. They were scared of Greg, scared of lawsuits, but they were tired of being silent. One by one, the pieces came together. A timeline, a paper trail, a story. And then came the tipping point. I met with my father's old lawyer, Mr. Halverson, an old-school, sharp-minded man who had helped set up the company's original charter. He was retired, but when I told him what had happened, he agreed to meet me at a diner. After I laid it all out, the forged signatures, the suspicious sale, the fake defamation lawsuit, he sat in silence sipping his black coffee. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Your brother may have stolen the company, Emily, but you still carry its soul." He offered to review everything for free, said it was the least he could do for Walter's daughter. I walked home that night with blistered feet and a full heart. But as I rounded the corner toward my apartment, I stopped cold. Someone had smashed the window to my unit. I rushed inside, drawers thrown open, papers scattered. My laptop, my files gone. Everything I had collected over the last month, wiped out. I sank to the floor, heart racing. Who would do this? And then in the corner of my kitchen counter, I saw it a business card. Garrison and Park, corporate law dispute resolution, Greg's lawyer. I knew then he was watching me, and he was scared, which meant I was onto something real. I filed a police report, but I knew nothing would come of it. Greg was rich, well-connected. He'd probably framed it like a robbery. There were no cameras in my hallway, and I didn't have renter's insurance. But what he didn't know was this: I had backups. Encrypted cloud copies of every file. Password-protected logs. Scans of every signed document I'd ever touched. And more importantly, I had witnesses now. Former employees, suppliers, even a few longtime clients who had been pushed out when Greg hiked prices post-sale. The fire inside me was raging now. No more tears, no more doubt. I wasn't the fragile sister anymore. I wasn't some emotional liability. I was the daughter of Walter Ross, the man who taught me how to fix things with my hands and lead with my heart. Greg may have taken my job, my money, even my reputation, but he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me, and that was going to cost him everything. I didn't want revenge just to watch Greg fall. I wanted justice, real lasting justice, the kind that burned clean and left no room for doubt about who was right and who had simply been louder, richer, and more entitled. So I stopped looking back, and I started building forward. With the help of Mr. Halverson and a few discreet advisors, I registered a brand new company under my name, EWR Systems. EWR stood for Emily Walter Ross. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I wasn't just living in my father's shadow. I was carrying his legacy forward, but I wasn't going to repeat the past. Instead of setting up another repair business like the old days, I built something smarter. I leaned into tech, designing a remote diagnostics platform for appliance repair that let homeowners scan, troubleshoot, and schedule fixes without ever needing to call a service line. I called it Fix First. It was faster, cleaner, easier, and most importantly, it addressed every complaint we used to get when I was with Ross Repairs. I funded the startup using a combination of small grants, freelance consulting, and a microloan. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Then I began assembling my team carefully, strategically. Carlos came first. He didn't hesitate. "I never trusted your brother," he said. "I was just waiting for you to make your move." Then came Jenna from HR. Then 2 of our best former field techs. Then 3 interns who'd been ghosted by Greg's new corporate regime. All of them had stories. All of them had been burned. Together, we weren't just employees. We were survivors. We launched in a tiny office above a mechanic shop with 2 folding tables and a whiteboard held together with duct tape. But we had something Greg's Frankenstein Corporation never would: loyalty. Word of mouth spread fast. Old clients started coming back. People remembered me. They remembered how my dad used to shake their hands after every visit, how we waived fees for single moms, how we stayed open late after storms to fix people's fridges before food spoiled. Greg had stripped the soul from the company. I was bringing it back. Within 5 months, Fix First was trending locally on small business blogs. We had over 2,000 downloads on our mobile app. A tech podcast picked us up for a feature. Suddenly, venture capitalists started sniffing around, and one of those VCs used to be on Nanotech's advisory board. He told me off the record that Greg was in trouble. Apparently, the merger hadn't gone smoothly. Several of the inflated numbers Greg submitted during the sale were now under federal review. Clients were suing for breach of contract. Morale was tanking. There were whispers of layoffs. And Greg, he was melting down behind closed doors. That's when I made my final move. With Halverson's help, I compiled all the documentation. I had every forged signature, every NDA, every manipulated figure. We sent a full anonymous dossier to the state attorney general's office and waited. 2 weeks later, Greg's face was on the local news not as a visionary entrepreneur, but as a suspect in a corporate fraud investigation. Reporters swarmed him outside his downtown condo. He looked bloated, sweaty, angry. And behind him, his quick fix spice sign was being dismantled. Apparently, Nanotech had voided the remainder of his consulting contract and filed a civil suit to recover damages. Poetic, really. He thought he was the wolf in the family. Turns out, he was just the bait. But I wasn't done yet. With Greg publicly disgraced and the former company now tied up in litigation, I made a quiet offer to purchase its remaining assets through a shell LLC to avoid tipping him off. And 2 months later, it was mine. The business my father built. The sign, the van, the original database of loyal customers, all of it. Greg, now drowning in legal debt, had no power to stop the transfer. I renamed it Walter Systems, in honor of the man who taught me to do things right even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. On our reopening day, I hosted a small gathering in the warehouse that used to be our central office. It wasn't flashy. A pot of coffee, some old photos on a corkboard, a banner made by Carlos's daughter. And right before we cut the ribbon, I stood up and addressed the team. I lost everything when my brother decided he deserved more, I said. He thought blood gave him power. But what he never understood is that family isn't something you take. It's something you honor. There were tears. There was applause. And there was healing. I ended with a message I had waited years to say. My brother used blood to build a wall. I'm using loyalty to build a bridge. A few months after the ribbon cutting, I found myself alone in my father's old office. The walls still smelled faintly of motor oil and old paper. His desk was right where he left it, heavy oak scratched from decades of use. I reached into the top drawer and found the little metal plaque he used to keep front and center, built on trust. Simple, honest, just like him. I closed my eyes and held it to my chest. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Greg was now bankrupt, publicly disgraced and shunned by the very community he once tried to dominate. His flashy condo was gone. His so-called friends evaporated the moment the headlines turned ugly. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't have to. What I celebrated was the return of what mattered: integrity, loyalty, legacy. Walter Systems was now thriving. Our app had hit 10,000 users. We'd partnered with several community colleges to offer job training. We even launched a small scholarship in my dad's name for young women in tech trades. That day, I hung the old plaque back on the wall just beneath a framed photo of my dad shaking hands with a smiling client grease on his shirt sleeve, heart in his eyes. I whispered, "We did it, Dad. I brought it home." And then I smiled. Not the kind of smile you give the world to look strong, but the kind you give yourself when you finally know you've done right. I didn't just rebuild the business. I rebuilt the bridge Greg tried to burn. And in doing so, I became more than just my father's daughter. I became the woman he always believed I could be.